On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Matthew Clemente. He is a Senior Vice President of Product and Development at Bigfoot Biomedical. We're going to be talking about how he approaches the scaling issue, especially being at a biomedical type company. He has some other complexities to deal with, especially on the regulatory side. And we're going to be talking about some of the complex windows that he has to fit things in. And also, he's dealing with a mission critical product. I mean, life and death type product, and be interesting to see some of those challenges. Matthew, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amir. A pleasure to join you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I guess we always like to start off with two things. One, if you could tell everyone what Bigfoot Biomedical does, and then also just what are your responsibilities as the SVP of Product and Development?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bigfoot Biomedical is an innovative diabetes technology company that is focused today on digitally connected solutions serving patients who have insulin requiring management of their diabetes.
Awesome. Sounds like a pretty important product given the size and scope and scale of people afflicted with diabetes. And as the SVP, what falls in your lap?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a really fun job here at Bigfoot, where I really view my role as accelerating value creation to those that we serve, and figuring out how we do that really while maintaining balance as an organization. Bigfoot just launched their first product, Bigfoot Unity. We're focused on how we continue to provide additional features and value to those patients while we continue to grow the business.
Awesome. I guess to dive into the topic, talking about some of the issues around scaling within the context of your industry and your role. I guess when you're kind of looking at that concept of scaling, maybe just defining what that means, because I think it's a very wide open discussion of what scale means. But I guess when you're looking at Bigfoot and what you're hoping to do, what does that mean?
Yeah, so I think with most things here at Bigfoot, we really start with the user, the patient at the center. So for me, I really kind of look at scale as to what that means first for our end users. So for us, scale is about the number of lives we get to touch and that we get to serve. So how we continue to bring these types of tools to patients who are really rather desperate need of it. We're very fortunate today where a lot of our initial patient base is really somewhat the most underserved and largest market within insulin requiring patients that need dose assistance with their multiple daily injection therapy. So folks, like my uncle, for example, they've probably been prescribed a regimen from their doctor. A lot of times that's been given to them on a piece of paper. And then a lot of the daily therapy decisions they need to make, a lot of it requires complex math, and they aren't given a robust set of tools to support them in that. So a lot of times, especially when you look at some of the safety considerations with these types of products, clinicians and patients will shy away from escalating into given therapies at an optimal time, or they'll go with oversimplified regimes for dosing, neither of which equate to the best outcomes for patients. And as diabetes is a chronic condition where the degradation over time leads to significant long-term complications, you getting into the right therapy at the right time, or you having the right dose at the right time, really makes substantial differences over time and what the life of that patient and some of the challenges or outcomes they'll have to deal with are. So I think really a lot of our focus is in how we address that broken therapy cycle, where there is lots of data, but little of it's captured, and the feedback loops between the patient and the clinician, or the feedback loops that are leading to an optimal therapeutic decision for a patient, whether that's being on a therapy or getting to the right dose, are really broken. So what we focused on at Bigfoot is really helping simplify a lot of that. So we don't sell a product here. It really is an overall solution as a service where we provide an integrated ecosystem where we're really leveraging data more meaningful in these feedback loops to give patients kind of a total bundled service that not only helps simplify their life with how they have to deal with diabetes day in and day out, but also creates much more meaningful discussions and dialogues and feedback loops with their clinicians, where more data is on hand, can more easily bring insights to the clinicians as they look at supporting their patients.
Yeah, that's, I mean, obviously a super valuable product. And I guess, we're talking about, biomedical and, obviously we're talking about regulatory impacts. And when you're looking at, achieving scale, obviously along the roadmap, there's major features that are going to need that regulatory approval. That's going to need, to go through those milestones. When you're sitting down and kind of looking forward and kind of planning that out, how do you account for, all the regulatory overhead that needs to be built into any of the roadmaps you're looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. When you add a regulatory cycle, traditionally with our types of product systems, where a lot of our product systems are considered class two medical devices in the US, portions of our systems then are regulated as class one elements. But when you look at that additional regulatory time, a lot of it is triggered by the need of user validation through human factor studies or through clinical activities. And between those summative validation activities and the regulatory cycles for review, you're traditionally looking at 9 to 12 months on top of actually developing, coding, and testing given features to actually get it into market. And when you're looking at incremental enhancements to the system or more substantial features that can add significant more value to the patient or the clinician, adding an additional year into a development cycle is the opposite of a very agile, very tech-driven startup. So that's where it takes a lot of work on our side first in the early definition phases to really understand that regulatory strategy, to make sure we're integrating it in, and then understanding how we do balance our internal efforts for getting out minor releases, which then typically won't require that regulatory interaction, but things that we can actually release to the field through internal development controls, as well as then what we consider more of our major releases, which traditionally then require regulatory clearance ahead of time and much longer cycles for ensuring the safe use of the product and the overall validation of the system.
Interesting. And I guess when you're looking at, those feature sets, obviously you'd like to get the most valuable product out. The FDA wants it on the hands of people to improve their lives. When you guys sit down and start, building out the MVP and trying to flesh that out, and then all of a sudden, I know you guys obviously have, researchers and scientists and biomedical engineers working on this stuff. How does that integrate into your team? Obviously, a lot of that stuff is lead time working ahead because I'm sure they have their own roadmap of what they're working against. But how much of that interaction, how tightly coupled are you from the actual development side with them?
Yeah, and that's I think one of the fortunate things around our structure here at Bigfoot, and also somewhat just the cultural that the organization was really kind of born from, is it's a very mission-driven company. And we've tried to keep things very flat. So the product and development organization that I run spans our product and user experience leaders, as well as a project management office, kind of that core engineering development organization, as well as our data science teams. So we fully integrated in elements of product ownership and user experience and human factors into the same organization. And we organize around those functions so people have the strong personal development, and we continue to elevate as a functional discipline the excellence we bring. But then we organize our teams as small cross-functional units that really have full autonomy in driving those given value creation activities as we see them. That's one piece. With that being said, it's product development doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? So product development to me isn't my organization, right? It's all of the leadership across our organization. So our commercial folks, where we have folks out with the clinics, we have folks interacting with the patients. We're very fortunate to be in an organization where we have direct contact with our end users on the patient side, as well as, it's really a service model that's enabled through the clinical office. So we enable, ways for the clinician to get reimbursed for engaging with their patients in a more frequent way. So it allows us to have those really personal touch points with the clinician and the patient. So we have a commercial organization that spans a lot of different areas there. So they're a really integral voice in our early development efforts, with not just the features and the solutions we're looking at, but again, our understanding of really framing the problem space and how we prioritize. I think It's critical for any organization independent of your size or scale. But I think especially for an organization like Bigfoot Biomedical, it is critical that we prioritize the investments that are going to have the most impact to our patients and to that interaction of clinicians with our patients. Even more so than how we accelerate and drive efficiencies in our development process. It's probably most important that we're developing the right things and we're focusing on the right bets. So bringing the whole organization and inviting them all to be part of that process, to understand how do we understand our problem spaces? How do we continuously get feedback from our end user around our assumptions around those problem spaces, even before we get into solutions? And how do we use that to accelerate? So we have a phenomenal upstream marketing organization that helps connect us with a lot of data out there around the external landscape and how it's moving around, continuing to uncover more about the unmet needs of our patients, the healthcare providers, the caregivers that support them, the payer systems that enable this type of product to get into their hands. So for us, it's, a continuous process of discovery and innovation. And, the more we can connect every part of our organization into that process, from my experience, at least over time, that's what leads to the most meaningful products that really do make a difference in people's hands at the end of the day.
Awesome. And I guess to that end, when you're kind of looking at people coming into the organization, right? Obviously, as you guys are trying to scale, you have to incorporate people. And, if somebody's joining the engineering team without, maybe necessarily worked in this type of environment, have you seen people, adopting pretty quickly to, some of the external factors that they have to account for? Is it something that is an issue or is it pretty seamless?
I would say I've never met an engineer in the medical device space that at the beginning of their time as they first enter, just like, man, I absolutely love all the documentation we have to do. It's not easy. It's a rigorous activity. I also don't know anyone who spent 20 plus years in the industry who doesn't absolutely love and cherish every element of that documentation process. So for us, it's, it really depends on how you look at it, where we have to do a lot of assessments around risk to understand, the potential failure modes in an untrained or in a trained practitioner's hands to understand how our product can break from every direction. And if you see that as a checking the box exercise, where you're doing it to ensure that you have a safe product and you can get approval for it, then you're completely missing the point. If you use that as a proactive exercise where you're doing it to better understand how are you more fit for purpose in your activities, how do you leverage that top-down understanding to actually accelerate your time to market, to make sure that you're putting the greatest investment in the areas where it matters the most. It can be the most rewarding, liberating, and really exciting process you get to engage with. So I think for me and a lot of the other leadership here at Bigfoot, we really value the people who join our team with a really diverse set of backgrounds and experiences. Some of those folks come from highly regulated industries, whether that's device or aerospace, or they may be coming from a tech startup where they've never had to work with that set of design controls or documentation rigor before. For us, that's where it's really about ensuring that we take that time up front with everybody to connect them to the why, to really the mission that we're on, what we're trying to do for our end users, for our patients, and also really making sure that we ground them in the value of understanding the role of things like risk management, change management, and some of these more rigorous practices, and the value of using them proactively and making sure that again, it's not a function doing a task, right? But it's every single engineer on my team. It doesn't matter if you're one of my leaders or if you're in systems engineering or mechanical engineering or software engineering. I really see us all having the exact same job, which is about, understanding our inputs. So understanding the problem we're trying to solve for, understanding, the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and the constraints, the real life constraints that, all of the users and stakeholders of the systems have to manage to then, use the skills we have as engineers and designers and developers to create, the most thoughtful outputs that are prioritizing how we create the most value in the quickest way possible and the safest way possible. So it's really about understanding inputs, outputs, risk, and evidence. So understanding, from a top down, what is most meaningful for patients for improving outcomes and driving a value, while at the same time understanding the other end of that scale, which is, all the different ways that a patient could be harmed, and ensuring that from a top-down view, we have all the appropriate controls and design mitigations in place to protect against that. While at the same time, very rigorously building the system from a bottom-up approach to really understand from the first principles and fundamentals of the biological loops we're interrogating to, the digital feedback loops we're creating in our systems, to understand how you marry, those solutions with those needs to create the most value as possible. And it's, to me, it's when you connect someone on the engineering or the design side with that transparency around, every single action they take, whether it's a line of code or a material they're selecting or a dimension they're drawing or a tolerance in a schematic that they're working on. When you actually connect that to what it really means to the end user, both on the benefit side of that equation, but then also on the risk side of that equation, and you give them the full autonomy to really get to own optimizing value and safety within that space, you get incredible engagement, and you build a culture where everybody feels comfortable, celebrating their differences and the diversity that they bring into that space, because we all come from very different backgrounds. I'm a firm believer that we're all somewhat the sum of our experiences, and really getting an organization to a place where everybody's celebrating that and everyone feels confident in being able to speak up and learn throughout the process as to how we all jointly get there together and adding the most value we can to our patients. It's a place where I can't wait to come into work every day.
That's super exciting. It sounds like, the culture side of, the why, the mission, drives a lot of the adoption of that documentation. Not something everyone wants to get into early in their career, as you mentioned, but once you're understanding that the ripples of that documentation touch more than just your time and effort, I think it becomes the big driver, which obviously is part of what you're talking about. I think that's super exciting.
Yeah, I love the Peter Drucker quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think, having gotten to participate in a lot of really phenomenal organizations at all different levels of size and scale, it's the one thing I've definitely seen ring true again and again. And for us, it is, a lot of folks in our company. So the company was originally founded in 2015 by a team of people with really personal connections to type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Our CEO, Jeffrey Brewer, became involved with the diabetes community when his son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2002. So he was previously a tech entrepreneur and served as the CEO to JDRF before starting Bigfoot. And at the time, him and Brian Maslish were really responsible for the first do-it-yourself closed-loop pump system, and saw a lot of opportunities in the space for technology to really change the paradigm of care. And, as two fathers in the space, right, this is a passion project of theirs. And I think everybody in the company, we have a lot of folks who have personal ties to the disease state, but I don't think there's anyone here who's really not here for a deeper sense of purpose of getting to serve those managing that disease state day in and day out. So for us, I think, that passion, that culture is certainly critical. I think, at the same time, there's also a lot you can do to ensure that all the documentation you are engaging in is really value added. So there's a lot we can do in how we architect our documentation sets, where, at the end of the day, as much as it's a document-driven, regulated approach, right, it's really about the data that those documents represent. So how you get to a place where, from a user needs or requirements or risk standpoint, you can imagine as your systems get more complex, that order of magnitude shift in complexity in your systems equates to an order of magnitude, if not greater, shift of complexity in the documentation sets you need to manage. So how you do that in an intelligent way where you actually, bring product line engineering and other modern systems engineering approaches into the data management of your underlying documentation. You can create it where, you really leverage, single sources of truth across your set and reusability to a high degree. So that way, as you're expanding a product into an adjacent therapeutic space, or as you're driving through variants or new feature sets in the products that you do support, you're really spending the time and the effort on the engineering side and the documentation side on the areas that are most valuable, the areas that are going to create the most value for the patient, the areas that are most important for you to understand and really put the appropriate analysis and evidence behind on the risk management side. So I think that's where, yes, everything we look at is really on the product side and what that means to the patient, but you really need to make sure that you're proactively and ahead of those product features, making the needed investments in your people and in your process and your infrastructure. So that way, not only are you connecting your people with the value of all of these activities and what it means to the end user, but you're also removing, the redundancies and continuing to get your folks focused on what are the most value-added activities for them as engineers and designers and developers.
Awesome, man. I love the passion. I love, what you guys are doing. It sounds like a great mission. And if somebody does want to reach out to you to kind of pick up on anything you said, kind of dive in deeper, what's a good way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way is to actually reach out through our website at bigfootbiomedical.com.
Awesome. Thanks for being on, Matthew. I really enjoyed your points of view, talking to you. Appreciate it.
No, Amir, thank you so much. I really appreciate listening to some of your podcasts in the past, and definitely look forward to hearing more from you and the team moving forward. So thank you so much for allowing me to join you.
Absolutely. And again, that's it for this episode. We'll be back again with a different guest, different topic. I always ask for two things. One is share the podcast episode if you like it. That's how we've been growing so far. And that's been really amazing to watch. And secondly, if you do want me to speak to a specific topic, let me know what that is. I'll do my best to find a guest to address it. And we'll go from there. Until next time, thank you. Goodbye.